Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'm sharing my recipe for devil's food cake. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. I do already have a killer chocolate cake recipe on the blog, but devil's food cake is notoriously richer, more chocolatey, and more moist, and I think you're going to love this one. Now to get started, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This recipe actually starts on the stovetop, so you'll want to grab a medium-sized saucepan. And here we're going to combine 1 cup of unsalted butter, a half cup of milk, and if you have coffee, you'll want to use 1 cup of coffee here. I am not a coffee drinker, so I'm just using 1 cup of water. 3/4 cup of cocoa powder, and this is Dutch processed cocoa powder. That is very important when you're making devil's food cake. And since I'm not using coffee, I'm going to be adding 1 teaspoon of instant coffee. Turn your stovetop heat to medium, and you'll want to stir this pretty frequently until that butter is nice and melted. As my butter begins to melt, I like to switch over to using a whisk. That just helps work out any clumps that might be there in the cocoa powder. Cook this until it comes to a boil, and the boiling is important because what this does is it blooms our cocoa powder, which really develops that rich chocolate flavor. Since I've got my boil, I'm going to remove this from the heat, and now I'm going to begin assembling my dry ingredients. In a separate bowl, I have measured out 2 cups of all-purpose flour. You'll want to add 1 cup of granulated sugar and 1 cup of firmly packed light brown sugar. We'll also add 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and that's another thing that's a little bit distinct to devil's food cakes, that they use a little bit more baking soda than most chocolate cakes. We'll also add a teaspoon of baking powder and 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Whisk this together until everything is nicely combined. You don't want there to be any lumps of brown sugar remaining. At this point, your chocolate mixture should have cooled a little bit. You really don't want to go any further with it until it's cooled for at least 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pour this into my flour mixture. Make sure you get all of that chocolate out there. You don't want any of that to go to waste. We'll stir everything together until this is nicely combined. You could use an electric or stand mixer for this recipe, but I'm just going to be mixing everything together by hand. But if you're doing this by hand, you do want to make sure that everything is stirred together until it's nice and smooth and there are no lumps remaining. The next ingredient you need is 3/4 cup of sour cream. This is full fat, not low fat. This helps make the cake nice and fudgy and especially moist. Stir this in until it's completely combined. Next, you are going to need 2 large eggs. Ideally, these should be at room temperature. You always want to crack these in a separate bowl. And good thing I did, because there's a little bit of shell and I can just scoop that out. Lightly beat these before adding them to your batter. It just makes it easier to incorporate everything smoothly. We'll also add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Once again, it's really important that this batter be nice and smooth, so just stir until all of your ingredients are fully incorporated. Make sure you're scraping the sides and the bottom of the bowl. I like to switch over from my spatula to using a whisk near the end, just so there are no lumps remaining. Today I'm going to be baking this cake in 2 8-inch round pans. I will include some notes in case you want to use a different baking pan, but the important thing is you want to get these nicely greased so the cakes come out nicely. Now I am just going to be spraying the sides with a bit of baking spray. I do want to note that this is a baking spray, not a cooking spray. It contains flour, which is really important so that the cakes release nicely. I like to use a paper towel just to evenly spread that along the rim. You could spray the entire cake pan, but what I've found is that a surefire way to guarantee these cakes are going to come out cleanly from the pan is to cut out rounds of parchment paper and just fit these neatly in the bottom of the pan. Then you don't have to worry at all about the cake sticking. All right, we'll evenly divide this batter between the 2 prepared pans. I always struggle making sure that I've done this just right. And we'll take these over to our preheated oven where they're going to need to bake for about 30 to 35 minutes. I recommend using the toothpick test to see if these cakes are done. And for devil's food cake, ideally when you insert the toothpick in the center, it should come out with a few moist, fudgy crumbs. Note that this is not wet batter, but the crumbs are a little bit moist. If you pull out the toothpick and it comes out completely clean, your cake is actually bordering on being overdone, and it might even overbake as it sits and cools. So aim for a few fudgy crumbs. We'll let these cool in the pan for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then take a knife and just run that along the edge of the cake, just in case it happened to stick. This is just extra insurance. Be careful because the pan might still be a little bit hot, but we're going to carefully invert this onto our cooling rack. Make sure you let these cakes cool completely before covering them with frosting. Today I am using my favorite chocolate frosting, but I will list out a whole bunch of some of my other favorite frosting suggestions for you. All right, let's cut into this cake and have a look. So hopefully you can tell on camera, but look how rich and fudgy and moist that crumb is. I mean, this is just beautiful. I think you're going to love this devil's food cake. If you try it out, please let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'm so excited for this one.